Great news! Automated workflows just got a lot more natural with Cognosys. Maybe you've spent a bunch of time manually setting up workflows and thought, man, I wish my automated workflow could be automatically set up. Maybe you've thought it would be great if you could just prompt it with natural language. Well, we're in luck. Cognosys is off the same wavelength. They think the future is conversational, which means that we can now schedule an automation or create one that's triggered with an event completely directly with natural language. We can even include real-time data scraped from the web and have it interact with our email, all just by typing it in. We're going to talk through prompting and possibilities. Let's go. There are two types of triggers that could set off your automation. The first is schedule. That's something like, say every morning at 9 a.m. you'll do blah, blah, blah. The second comes in response to an event. So maybe that's every time my boss sends an email with update ? In the subject line, draft an email summarizing everything that I've done in the past week. Cognosys appreciates it if you start your sentence with the trigger. In the case of scheduling, you might want to type something like maybe every Friday at 9 a.m. send me. Maybe you have a super niche interest that you can't yet find a newsletter for. So maybe you want your own customized newsletter on experimental music events and news in Southeast Asia. I haven't found a newsletter for this yet. If you found one, let me know. I'll be curious. But your trigger at the start here, that's based around a time schedule, could, be anything you want. If you're thinking of having your trigger be an event, you could front the event by saying something like maybe when you receive an email from boss@gmail.com with update in the subject line, and maybe this is the action that gets triggered. You want a reply containing a summary of all the work that you did. As a quick note, Cognosys is pretty responsible. It never sends the email first. It just saves it as a draft. So even if you've asked for it to send an email to a particular address and they claim that they've sent it over here, it's actually just going to be saved as a bunch of drafts in your drafts. But still with the right email filled out in the to section, which is definitely helpful if you're going to be sending these emails out in bulk. Just so you can clearly see what everything is going to look like, we're just going to run this one. Every Friday at 9 a.m., write a summary of all the experimental music events and news in Southeast Asia that took place that week. Include relevant links after every news item and event. So the first thing that Cognosys is going to do that I think is super duper helpful is it helps us refine our prompt. So if you did have a specific source, you could go ahead and click that. But in my case, I'm pretty agnostic. Submit this, and then they'll create our workflow for us. As this is generating, the first thing that I think is worth noting is you'll see that this is a drop-down menu, so it's something that we have the freedom to edit. So maybe you might have initially wrote in your prompt Friday at 9 a.m., but maybe you're realizing, hey, Friday at 9 a.m., I'm not actually going to be opening this. Maybe it's better to have it maybe after you clock out from work at 6. Besides that, you'll see, okay, these are the steps that it's come up with. My suggestion is pretty straightforward, but if you've written out something way more complicated and you aren't completely happy with how it's come out, you can easily regenerate over here in the bottom right. If you're happy with this, you could do one of two things. You could either test run it or save and improve. If you test run, it's going to try it out. Okay, I've just discovered the reason why there is no newsletter on this topic. But it came in anyway, no qualms about sending emails to ourselves. So I've generalized it. I'm going to just say The Wire and anywhere else. And hopefully we're going to test run it. It's test run more successfully this time. If we're curious, we can go ahead and click on View Sources over here to see what steps it took. These were the 7 sources it found after running the searches. It summarized it like this in nicely written prose, which I think is helpful, and then they've made it even more concise in this manner. If you're happy with that, you can go ahead and click Save and Approve. For me personally, I would have actually been maybe a bit more specific about the kinds of news I was interested in, because this is a little bit disappointing, but I think that's fine. All of your automations are going to show up here. If you click on automations, and you can easily turn any that you want on and off just by toggling the button. And that's it. We've talked through prompting around creating an event-based automation, a quick note about how your email is never sent, only saved as a draft, and lastly, we demonstrated a super quick example of setting up an automation. 2 final things I'll say before we close off. We kept our example pretty brief, but I think there's definitely a lot of specificity that you could get from this tool in ways that aren't necessarily feature-specific, which is why we didn't go too much into it, but it's still good to explore. So, for example, you'll see on your homepage, at least at the time of recording, some of these example prompts. I think that these are really useful templates that you can go ahead and edit, replacing, let's say, Nike with a company that you're more interested in researching. Same thing for Tokyo and nearby cities. And yeah, again, not necessarily unique to Cognosys, but they also have the option to interact with a PDF. I think it could be pretty interesting to have this interact with your whole process of automating the drafting of an email. And if this is something that you do explore or anything else, we would love to hear about it. For now, this is it. And until next time, happy automating.